Today we're going to be looking at the Arccaptain MIG200. Now, Arccaptain was kind enough to reach out to me and asked if I might be interested in one of their welders to showcase the welder on the channel and show you guys what their products are all about. I happily accepted because we've had a number of people ask a number of welding questions on this channel, and I've previously featured some other welders. So I thought the MIG200 would be a good option to display for you guys today. Now there's a lot of reviews on this welder out on YouTube, and so I want to put a little bit different spin on it. So we are going to unbox this today. I'm going to show you everything that comes with it, and I'm going to give you my opinion on the quality of the parts and components that are shipped with the MIG200. But a little change of pace today for this review. I have Jeff with me today. Now, I've got quite a bit of experience welding with a number of different welders, so I feel like I can accurately tell you guys what I like and don't like about this machine in comparison to other welders. Now, on the other hand, Jeff has very little experience, actually no experience welding. And so Arccaptain markets these welders as being very beginner friendly. And today we have a beginner who's going to be able to display his ability to use this welder right out of the box. And I'm not going to provide him any feedback. He's already taken a little bit of a look at the manual this morning, but you guys are going to get to see, if as a brand new welder, what can you accomplish with this machine. So let's get this thing unboxed and let me show you everything that comes with the Arccaptain MIG200. Okay, so this is everything that comes with the Arccaptain MIG200 package. Now this is the most basic package that you can get from Arccaptain for this welder. There are a few things missing from this package that you are going to need to acquire before you can start welding if you want to do shielded MIG gas welding. You could take this package as it is and use it as a stick welder, or you could use flux core wire and you can use the MIG welder as it is. However, if you want to do shielded gas MIG welding, which is what I recommend because it's far cleaner, far easier to me than flux core welding is, right off the bat, know that you're gonna be in for getting yourself a regulator, which can be had for probably as little as 50 bucks for a lower quality one, as well as a gas tank for this thing. No welder comes with a gas tank, but often some of these budget welders do come with the regulator, so keep that in mind. My first impressions right out of the box, all of these components are, I would say, on par with the other budget style welders that I've used in the past. The MIG gun feels fairly solid, doesn't feel cheap or anything like that. It's got a nice thick lead on it. Honestly, we're not gonna be doing any stick welding. That's not typically what I use my welders for, but the stick torch here has a nice positive clamping. It's got a nice solid spring in there. It feels fairly quality. The ground clamp is very typical of what you would get with any of these style of welders. It's on the cheaper side. If you're going to be doing a lot of light duty welding, this will probably work just fine for you. But I want to show you an example from a cheaper welder. So you can see these are very similar ground clamps here, if not exactly the same. Well, they're slightly different. And the copper strapping in this one is a little bit thicker on this one than this other cheap one I've got. But you can see I did a lot of heavy welding with this welder, and you can see how burnt up that copper strap is in there. It's basically ready to fail. I just replaced this ground clamp on a different machine because I wasn't happy with either the spring clamping tension or the fact that this ground strap was failing in there. So keep in mind, if you're going to be using a welder like this for heavy gauge welding, eventually you're probably going to end up having to replace the ground clamp. But that is not unique to Arccaptain. That's across the board for almost all of these budget style welders. This welder is also capable of doing aluminum welding with the spool gun, as well as TIG welding. I believe it's a lift arc TIG feature on this machine. We don't have those accessories, so we're not gonna be testing those features. Today, we're primarily gonna be focused on shielded gas MIG welding. So let's go ahead and get this welder put together and let's put it to the test. So on the back side of this unit, this is where you're gonna connect your shielding gas. I've already got a tank set up here with the regulator, so we're just gonna use the existing setup that I have to get this going. And these are all typically a common thread pitch, but you wanna be careful. If you're using a different hose from a different machine, make sure everything fits appropriately. Now, on these cheaper machines, one other thing that I've noticed, this one seems to have a much better positive connection between the gas adapter and the back of the unit. On other cheaper units that I've seen, if you try to just outright tighten this down, this fitting will spin, and that's not good. You don't want that to happen. This actually feels like it has a more positive connection, but in order to stay safe, we are gonna throw a wrench onto that fitting to keep it from turning, and then we're just going to snug down our hose here. So that would be a positive for the Arccaptain. That's already feeling much more quality than some of the other cheaper welders that I've worked with. It's all these little details that add up, because a lot of these welders come in at the same price point, have a lot of the same features. When you can take your wins on things like that, the quality of the connectors, the quality of the fittings, those are all positives. We're gonna go ahead and open up the side of the machine here. First off, there's a setup guide here. So it shows you how to set the proper polarity. So DCEN, that's gonna be your flux cord type welding, where you're gonna actually hook up your ground clamp to the positive lead and the gun to the negative lead. DCEP, that's shielded gas welding. So in this instance, you're gonna hook up your MIG lead to the positive and your ground clamp to the negative. Just keep that in mind. If at any point you switch between the two, you're out, maybe you're not in your shop, you wanna take this unit out into the field and you're gonna use flux core welding without gas, you need to swap the polarity of your connections. This is pretty common in most units to have kind of a material thickness and settings guide. I like that Arccaptain has put this on the inside of their panel on some other units that I've worked with recently. They have these guides, but they're in the manual. And that can be a little bit frustrating because you got to go find your manual, find what you're looking for. And as a beginning welder, I highly recommend referencing these charts when you're setting up your welder, because it's going to give you a great starting point. So I like that Arccaptain has this right on the inside of their panel. So I went ahead and I'm inspecting the roller here. This is keyed, this roller is keyed. So you want to identify which side of the roller this is going to go on, and then you want to make sure you get that roller lined up with the key, and it just slides in place like that. Then it's as simple as screwing down the roller and locking that in place. I like that this machine comes with multiple different rollers, because these are wear items. If you're doing a lot of welding, eventually you might find that your wire's starting to slip. If it's not dirty, it could be that you've worn out that roller. So you've got replacement rollers. I like that. Not a lot of budget welders come with those types of things, so that's another positive for Arccaptain. Next, we're gonna set up our wire here, our wire feed. So we're gonna unscrew where our coil is gonna go, and you'll notice that there's a little knob on this wire spool. This one's a little shallow. That's not probably gonna matter, but I've seen a thicker retention knob on some other units. This is gonna correspond with our spool, and what that does is it locks the spool in place so that when this is turning, that spool can't free spool on here, unwind all your wire, or just not turn when you want it to turn. We're going with an 025 welding wire today. That's another, I don't want to say ding, because I often don't even use them, but most units will come with a very small roll of welding wire just to get you started. You don't get that with the Arccaptain. Oftentimes what you'll find is these smaller rolls will come with these cheap welders. This one is a roll that's set up for aluminum welding on a spool gun, but you'll often get a little one like this just to get you started with the unit. The Arccaptain does not come with that. So I typically go ahead and buy an 11-pound roll for these smaller units. These are gonna last you quite a while, whereas these smaller rolls, this one is 1 pound. You're gonna blow through that wire fairly quickly if you're doing a lot of welding. I kind of save these as for a backup emergency situation. That's another thing that you're gonna have to purchase to get yourself started. When you're installing one of these rolls of MIG wire, the wire is always gonna be bent over and stuffed through the spool. Always, always, always keep your finger on the wire before you cut that little chunk of wire off of there, because if you do not, this spool is gonna bird's nest, free spool and bird's nest, and you really don't want that. So always keep a good hold of that wire as you're loading it into the unit. Now you'll see here, we've got this hole in the spool, and that's gonna correspond with this little nub that we have up here on the feeder. We want this spool to feed from the bottom side. You wanna feed in a straight line. So you can see if I installed this upside down, that wire is gonna have to come down at an angle in order to go into the gun. So that's the improper way to install wire spool on a MIG feeder. So you really want this spool to be feeding as straight as possible to provide as little resistance to pull the wire out as possible. Feed that into our liner. And then we're gonna feed this into the front of the gun there. And then I need to line up my spool with that knob. Okay, just like that. And then we're gonna take our retainer and just tighten this down. That locks in place like that. Grab our MIG gun here, and you can see You've got a few connections, one for the wire, one for the gas, and then a couple pins for the trigger in there. So we're gonna just line that stuff up. There we go. And then the end of this threads in. Okay, now I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna feed my wire in just a little bit further so it feeds into the gun, and I can feel that there's no resistance on that wire. It's going in. So I'm gonna go ahead and close down my roller setup here, clamp that in, and this is an adjustment. This is an adjustable knob here. It's gonna adjust how much tension is being put down onto that wire. This is something that you're gonna have to play around with and adjust a little bit. You don't need to just go and crank this thing all the way down, but you do wanna tighten this down in a way that as you're pulling the trigger, the wire is feeding with the speed of the roller and it's not slipping in the roller. The other thing to check is our tip size here. This is an 030 tip and we are using 025 wire across the board without even using these tips. I'll say that most often the tips that are sent with the units are on the cheaper side. They're easier to get plugged up. They don't just work quite as well as a little bit nicer contact tip. So that is across the board kind of what you run into on these cheaper welders. So I always tend to upgrade the tip before I even start welding with a newer unit. And that's what we're gonna do now. We're gonna put a 025 wire tip, contact tip on this gun. So the unit does come with this little contact tip tool, and you can see there's a flat spot on the tip here, so you can actually put that on the end of there and spin your tip off. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead, flip the welder on here. Now I don't have everything set up. I'm just doing this so I can feed some wire through here. So I wanna come up to mode. You can see it's in MIG mode here. So that should allow our roller to roll when I pull the trigger. So you can see there. Okay, our 025 tip is gonna go on. Very simple, and I usually just finger tighten those. I don't need them super tight. And then that shield just plugs right back on. Okay, we're gonna shut the welder off again because I've not yet hooked up any of my leads or grounds or anything like that. This lead right here is gonna be for your MIG gun. So remember earlier we talked about whether you have shielded the right polarity for flux core welding or gas welding. So for this lead that's in the front of the unit, this corresponds with the MIG gun. We want to be on our positive lead down here. So if you come around to the front here, you can see little polarity symbols up here. So there's a plus there and there's a minus up here. So we know we want our MIG gun plugged in to our positive lead there, and those are just quarter turns. And then our ground lead is gonna go to our negative here. And these again are slotted. So you get those keyed appropriately, and then it's like a quarter turn, and that's tight. At this point, we're basically ready to start welding. We've got our ground lead hooked up, our MIG lead hooked up, our gas is hooked up. Now it's just going through the settings on the welder and getting this thing dialed in and ready to use for our first test here. Okay, so the first button here, this little play button, you're gonna see it switch between V for voltage. Right now it's at 16.9 volts. We come into here, and I believe this is a memory setting. So if you are welding the same thing over and over and over again, you could save those parameters, I believe. Then when you adjust your welder away to do something else, you know you're gonna go back, you can come over to this memory mode, and I believe that'll allow you to store some parameters, one set of parameters in here. We come down to the mode button here. This is where it's gonna switch between the different welding modes. So first up, stick welding, TIG welding, which we don't have as a function for this welder at the moment because we don't have the accessory, but it is capable of doing it. MIG welding with the spool gun for aluminum, and then MIG welding, which is what we're focused on today. Right now in our manual mode, we can adjust the voltage with this knob and our wire feed speed with this one. Okay, that's how you typically are going to set up any welder in a manual mode. You're looking at adjusting your voltage and your wire feed speed. Now, if we come over to the SIN mode here, the SIN mode is designed to help you dial in the settings. All you need to do on this mode is you need to be sure that you're in your MIG mode. This button down here is your filler wire size. So you can see there's 023. We're actually using 025. 030, 035, and 040. So we're gonna set this at 023. We need to set our gas mixture, which is what this button right here is gonna do. It's gonna tell the type of filler wire that we're using or the type of gas that we're using. So filler aluminum for aluminum, iron for a straight CO2 gas mixture, or iron for a mixed gas. So we're using 25% CO2 and 75% argon, so we're going to set this to our iron mixture. So this last box here is for your gas flow settings. The first one is a 2T setting, the second one there is a 4T setting, and this last one is for spot welding mode. So up here, when you have these three dots here, you can hit this mode button and it's going to go into S, which is spot welding mode. This is a feature that I am going to be testing eventually because we're doing a lot of sheet metal welding and we do a lot of spot welding. So I'm going to try and play with that feature a little bit later. Normally I set this at a 2T, which means when you pull the trigger, gas is delivered. When you release the trigger, gas is stopped. 4T mode means you pull the trigger, gas is delivered. You release the trigger, the gas continues to deliver until you pull the trigger again. Now, why would you use that function? It's almost like a post-gas flow function where as your weld puddle's cooling, if you're in 2T mode and that shielding gas is removed, if you see oxidation or bubbling in the weld puddle as it's cooling because you're not getting any shielding gas over the top of it, maybe you're welding in windy conditions or you got your fan on in your shop and it's just blowing oxygen onto that hot weld puddle, you can turn on this 4T function and that's going to continue to deliver shielding gas until you pull the trigger again, and then it will stop. So you can actually cool your weld puddle down with that shielding gas and avoid getting that oxidation in the weld puddle. And then this last dial here is for inductance and how you adjust the inductance of the arc characteristics. You can adjust it hard to soft, so more of a hard stop, soft stop arc, depending on what you're doing. I don't play with the inductance a whole lot on my welders, but I usually set it into kind of like middle of the ground. Especially as a beginner, you're going to want to just set this as a standard. So those are the basic settings for this unit. It's really straightforward. I'm going to go ahead and get this thing set up to do some test welding here. We're going to weld on some scrap metal. I'm going to dial it into the settings that I like, show you what quality of weld you can get out of this. I'm not an expert welder. I'm self-taught, but I've been doing this for a long time. So I could probably get it dialed in pretty good, get a decent looking weld going. Is that really critical to the beginning welder? You may not be able to dial in a unit manually on your own. In order to demonstrate how a beginner can use this welder, I'm going to have Jeff step in and I'm going to turn this instrument off. I'm going to mess all the settings up and I'm going to let him dial the welder in using the SIN mode, weld on the same type of materials that I'm welding on, and then we're going to compare our two welds. Now, this isn't necessarily a competition, but I want you guys to see what someone who has very little experience welding can do with this welder, because that's who this welder is marketed for. It is at a price point for beginning welders, so I really want you to see what a beginning welder can do with this unit. That said, I'm going to go ahead and get this set up. We're going to lay a couple test beads down. I'm going to get it dialed in. And then I'm going to turn the reins over to Jeff. So we've been discussing the things that you might need in addition to your brand new welder, right? You need a new roll of wire, you might need a regulator, there might be some other things missing that you need. One thing we haven't talked about is safety and protection. And the guys over at Heatshield Products offer a range of welding products that you may or may not be familiar with. These are all shielding blankets. So if you are welding around or near something that you care about, you don't want all the little tiny chunks of slag damaging the different parts and components that you're welding around, you can get these blankets from Heatshield Products. They come in a lot of different varieties here. Here I'm featuring 3 different setups. One that's clearly stitched here so that you can have a part sticking out of the blanket and protect everything down and around it. This bottom one's kind of a standard blanket, and then this third one here, you notice it's got magnets built into it. So if you're working on a vertical seam or something and you want to protect everything down the side of a car, you could technically stick this on there and protect the area around the vehicle. Now, in addition to protecting the parts and components that you're working on, it's important that you protect yourself as well. And that's where these little welding pillows come in. These things are great for ergonomics of welding. The key to me to making good welds is to being comfortable while you're welding. You can use these little welding pillows as rests for your arm as you're welding on a surface. If you're laying on the ground, you can throw your head on this pillow and prop yourself up to a position that you can see a little bit better. That way you're not straining your neck, straining your wrist. These are great tools for the ergonomics of the welding process. So go over to Heatshield Products, check those guys out. They're a made in the USA company. They're really cool guys. They are really heavily involved in classic vehicles, race vehicles, all kinds of parts and components. In addition to their welding products, they have a full line of automotive products as well. So check them out, heatshieldproducts.com. Okay, so the first test we're gonna do here is on really thin stuff. And this is stuff that would be typically pretty difficult for a beginner to weld. Just thin metal. I've played around with the settings a little bit. I'm in manual mode, so I've kind of dialed it in the way that I like it. I'm gonna lay a bead down on these 2 pieces of sheet metal. You'll notice that I'm also working on top of another piece of sheet metal. We're using this as a backing plate so that we don't weld straight down to the table here. So if we end up sticking this to this plate, no big deal. I'd rather not stick it to my welding table. So the first test here is gonna be with this sheet metal. Then I'm gonna use this little bit thicker, like 3/16 thick steel. This will be a little bit easier for a beginner to weld because we can really crank the heat up. So I'm gonna do 2 different demonstrations here welding, and then I'm gonna turn the reins over to Jeff and let him do something similar. First initial impressions, really good control on this thinner material. You can see we got good penetration all the way through onto the backside. This is just my very first impressions welding with this. I have less than 5 minutes on this unit, and you can see we get a nice, pretty clean weld on this scrap sheet metal we've got here. This is just 18 gauge sheet metal, something like you'd find on a car. As far as how the welder operates, super clean. I'm really, really happy with this. I did not blow through the sheet metal in any location. I felt like I had really good control over the weld puddle. This would make for a very easy cleanup with a grinder and a flap disc here, and then some sanding discs to get this back down to being smooth. So really, really happy with the performance on thin sheet metal. Okay, so for the next demonstration here, we did the little sheet metal here. We're gonna do a 3/16 plate here, and we're just gonna do an inside corner bead. So this actually should be a fairly easy weld to make. So we're gonna try and keep it fair here and not do anything too complicated. Ooh, not the prettiest thing I've ever done. Not too bad though. I felt like I wasn't getting great penetration on that run, and I did set this up manually. So you can see on the backside, not super great penetration. If I was spending a little bit more time on this piece, what I probably would have done is I would have beveled my inside piece so I could get more penetration on that. But you can see a pretty nice clean weld. We're handicapped a little bit because we are using the 025 wire. I do have this on 220 volts, so we didn't max out the power here. I probably would go a little bit hotter with it if I was to do this again, but that does show me I can get nice, really clean welds. I could probably get better penetration with a little bit better technique and the settings a little more dialed in. We're doing this kind of quickly this morning, just trying to show you right off of initial setup, not having spent any time with this unit, what we can get accomplished. So now that I've done that, I've done 2 kind of comparison pieces here. I'm gonna let Jeff take over the reins, and he's gonna do the exact same 2 welds that I did. We're gonna compare them, and I show you guys right out of the box, what can a beginner do with this Arccaptain MIG200 welder. Jeff, if you could reiterate, how much welding experience do you have?
One time with a welder, the time that you showed me a while back.
Yeah, so about a year or 2 years ago, I spent about 10 minutes with Jeff and quickly showed him how to weld some sheet metal. I mean, it was literally like 10 to 30 minutes maybe, and you use time with the welder was maybe 10 minutes. So.
Oh gosh, significantly less than that.
Yeah, so Jeff really is a beginner welder. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna change this voltage, and I'm gonna change this wire speed, and I'm adjusting them away from what I just did. And I'm gonna let Jeff use the SIN mode up here, and we're gonna see how well that works to dial in some of these settings for a beginner right out of the box. We're gonna go ahead and we're gonna put this thing in syn mode. We are gonna tell it that we are using the mixed gas. We are gonna tell it that we're using the small wire. Once the welder's had its chance to kind of dial the setting in, these are fine adjustments that you can make based on how the welder's doing. So this is gonna be a good starting point. And then from there, we let Jeff and the welder do its thing. So we're gonna start first with a couple pieces of 18 gauge sheet metal, and I'm gonna let Jeff have at it.
Okay. So should they be butted together like that, or do you need a gap?
No, you can, for what the purposes of what we're doing, we're gonna make it easy on you. We can butt those nice tight together. We're not worried. Like normally if you were doing a sheet metal repair, you'd have a little gap there so the weld could actually fill the gap in. But for the purposes of what we're doing today, we'll make it easy. You can butt those up nice and tight to one another.
Okay. And as a electrician's son, I mean, should I not be touching the table?
You can touch
I'm
the
grounded
table. You're
here.
okay.
Am I good?
Yep, you're good.
Just, don't want to get juiced.
Nope, you're good.
Okay. Do I make contact and then hit the button, or?
No, you're gonna want to be just off the piece and then pull the trigger and let the wire come down to the tip. What I like to do is if there's extra wire hanging out of the end of the gun, I'll just take my wire cutters and I put them tight to the back of my shield there. I just snip that off. It gives you a nice short piece of wire to start with, so you're not sticking way off the piece when you pull the trigger.
Okay. And should I just put little spots and then
Yep,
go,
so what I would suggest for the light sheet metal is to do a little tack at a time. So attack, 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 and try and get them. I always try to overlap about half on each one. Overlap the tacks by about half.
I'm not sure what you mean by
So you lay a tack down, you're gonna get a nice circle, okay? So the next one, instead of starting like a full circle away, you kind of start right on the edge of that tack.
Oh, okay. So
kind of like,
I don't just lay a continuous bead.
You can try that.
Okay.
You can try it. You're a beginner here, so I don't want to give you too much advice.
Okay. I just want to make sure I don't do anything stupid. It's hard to see.
This is totally acceptable. And the one thing you're going to notice, and you take a look at the difference between our two pieces here, is you see just a little bit more penetration on my piece here than this one. But for a beginner, out of the box, on straight sheet metal, this is really good. Normally what you're gonna see is blow through, you're gonna blow through holes. A beginner's gonna really struggle with sheet metal. So the fact that out of the box, we put that thing on syn mode, and it did its adjustments as you were welding, and it laid down, you laid down a bunch of tacks here. It's more like spot welding than it is straight through welding. But I would say as a beginner, like with no experience, that's really good. So I would put that as a plus in the column for the Arccaptain MIG200.
I feel like, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, I spent a little more time than I needed to laying each spot down. Are they too tall? Are they too big?
No,
or?
Don't worry so much about the height. What you really want is you want penetration all the way through. So
okay.
You could have gone just a millisecond longer on these because you can see the difference. Okay, you see how you can actually see the weld come through on the backside. Mm-hmm. So we're getting full penetration in this piece.
Okay.
Look at the heat signature on this. I probably was a little hot, and that's why you get some of this like warpage. You can see how my panels kind of pulled together. But you see this heat signature off on either side, mm-hmm. and then compare that to this one.
Okay.
You see how the heat signature is much more localized. The welder's probably doing a better job at I tend to weld a little hotter than I need to, and that's evident in this piece. The welder's doing a better job at controlling that heat signature than my manual settings, to be honest. I did get a little bit better penetration through this panel than these settings did. So I would say you could spend even a millisecond longer. You're always gonna have to grind down your welds here and clean this up. You just don't want a giant pile of weld there that's gonna be difficult to clean up, so.
Okay.
Okay, can I offer one?
Of course.
One piece of advice. So what I'm noticing is you're coming in at a really steep angle.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I don't know if this will be more comfortable for you or at all or not, but if you can move this around too, wherever it's comfortable on the table.
Okay.
But if you rest your wrist on this, you're gonna be able to control the height of the gun, and you're not going to be moving the gun quite so much.
Should I be straight down like that?
You can have a little bit of angle on there. You can be straight down. It's just more or less about getting yourself comfortable.
Okay.
When you're coming in at a steep angle, you can see how your welds are actually a little drawn out and elongated. You see that in this one, like how it's kind of elongated. So if you're coming at it more vertically, you're going to get more of that nice round type of spot weld.
Gotcha.
But you don't have to be like perfectly spot on vertical.
Okay.
So, and if that's not comfortable, that's fine too. But it's all about trying to get yourself comfortable when you're welding. And before you go, you can see how you got like maybe an inch out, right? I personally like to have this a little bit shorter when I start because then you're not holding the shielding cup a full inch away from the part. You can actually get your shielding cup a little bit closer, and that's going to really put that gas down on top of that weld and protect the weld from oxidation.
So I noticed that I was getting, does that mean I'm not moving fast enough and the wire's coming out faster than I can use it?
Because we're using the SIN mode here, it's kind of automatically setting those settings for you. It could be that you're pulling away too quick before you, like you're pulling away before you let off the trigger.
Oh.
That could be part of it. I don't know. I didn't pay that close attention, but that could be part of it.
Okay. Good to know.
Hold your welds just a little bit longer.
Okay.
There you go. That's a good one. That sounds really good. You can hear that almost like bacon sizzling sound. It's really smooth and consistent. That's a good sound.
Well, and that's helped with the amount of wire that's coming out. You were 100% correct about me pulling it back too quickly. Because if I stay on it, that doesn't happen. That was too short.
Jeff, that is really good for a first-time welder.
Thank you.
On sheet metal. Now, you see the difference here in where we started. So I corrected Jeff a couple of tacks after he did the first few here, where he was really coming in at an angle and was really short pulling the welder here. And you can see how you get these kind of teardrop-shaped tacks in here, a little inconsistent. And then once I had him start holding that weld just a little bit longer, you get that nice, clean, circular puddle that you can then start to kind of stack on top of one another. This is really, really good stuff here. Now, this piece is going to be hot, so I'm not going to touch it. We're going to flip this piece over. Now, look at how much better the penetration is where you started holding this a little bit longer. You can see that weld
you can see the progression
start to come through. So that's actually really, really good. I'm going to be 100% honest, for a beginner out of the box using this welder for sheet metal, that is a really impressive result. Now, there's a difference between doing this with really clean pieces on the table and then applying that to something like this charger. And that's what we're gonna do after Jeff does his little 3/16 test here. So we're gonna try this, the 3/16 plate out, do a similar right angle weld on that. And then once Jeff's done with that, we're gonna move over to his charger over here, and we're gonna actually weld in some rust patches on the car. So we'll go ahead and get Jeff set up with these two pieces of 3/16 and see what he can do on an inside quarter weld. All right, so fully SIN mode, and I showed you guys there a brief second. You can see this is where it's starting out. You can see as he was welding, it was kicking the voltage and the amperage up on this setting. So even though the setting is exactly the same for this piece of sheet metal that he did here, it did kick the voltage and amperage up. Now, for a first-time welder, this is really not bad at all, but I think what we're gonna see on the SIN mode on this one is I had pretty poor penetration. I think this one might even be a little bit worse. The penetration between these two, I had the amperage and the voltage kicked up significantly higher, and you can actually see some color change on my piece here, where you can see the heat really got into the back side of that. This one, maybe a little bit towards the end there as it was getting hot, but not quite as much penetration. You can also see, through no fault of what Jeff was doing, wire speed, so probably wanted about the same wire speed, maybe a little less and more voltage in there, because you can see how the weld is piled up in there, and that's a result of the wire not being, one, hot enough, or the wire speed being a little too fast. So it's kind of piling that filler wire in there, and you get that kind of bubbled appearance of the weld. We'll compare that with mine here, and you can see it's not nearly as bubbled up. But however, for a first-time welder, I've seen a lot worse welds than that from people who are just starting out. So, you know, the fact that you can use this welder, what I would recommend now is, this has kind of like its base settings here. If we did a test weld like that, we could come over here and we can turn the voltage up. We can say we want to go up 2 volts, 3 volts. And now it's going to start at 21.7. So this thing gets you close. You can evaluate the weld as you're going, and you can dial this thing in just by turning the voltage button. It's going to do everything else for you. So as a beginner, I think that's a really nice function, and I think it probably will give you a lot of confidence as you're learning and you're welding more and more. You can see the results change as you're changing the settings without the confusion of, oh, what do I need the wire speed? What do I need the voltage and all that?
That's exactly it. I mean, that's the big plus for me. I don't have to worry about setting anything. I can just focus on making my weld.
Right, exactly. So, okay, man, I think these are two really good, like, you probably even almost beat me on the sheet metal here. That was really impressive on the sheet metal. I think I got you on the 3/16 plate here, but now I want to put you to the test, and I want you to actually weld on your car. So we're going to get things rearranged in the garage here. We're going to get Jeff set up so that he can actually start making some repairs on his 1973 Charger here. And if you guys want to see more about this car, check out my YouTube channel, Cody Builds. We're doing a whole build series on this car, all kinds of cool stuff that we've got going with this car right now. All right, so here is Jeff's finished product, and I have to say, for a first-time welder welding sheet metal, partially rusty sheet metal on the original piece of the car, that is very impressive. I am really impressed both with Jeff's ability and the ability of the machine. Now you can see, if you're really going to be picky about welding, you can come in here and see some inconsistencies, but remember, this is a first-time welder. I think this is extremely impressive. It's impressive how intuitive the Arccaptain settings are. Jeff, I'll ask you, as far as ease of use, how did you find using this welder?
Incredibly easy. All I really had to do was pull the trigger. I didn't have to worry about the settings or anything like that. And I just got to focus on, you had pointed out the inconsistencies, I got to focus on how I was holding the welder and how, pulling the trigger and leave it in place before I pulled it away. When I was doing things right, those are the good welds. When I wasn't focused on that, that's where I had a little trouble.
Yeah.
But I was able to just think about that and only that and not worry about the welder settings at all.
Yeah, so we should really point out that we put that welder in sin mode, and I let him go about it, and I wasn't even watching what he was doing. I went and ran some errands while he was welding that up. Did not adjust the settings manually at all. Went on sin mode, and he was able to weld through sheet metal, which I think is a more challenging thing to do, especially for a beginner. Now, I did have a few blow-throughs, but that's to be expected on old metal where it's thin. But he was able to recover those, yep. And everything turned out really nice. So I have to say, if I'm grading it on a beginner's use, those are some of the best welds I've seen a beginner do on sheet metal. And I don't want to take any credit away from Jeff and what he was able to do, but also the fact that he didn't have to futz with the welder. That's a big confidence builder. When you can set that thing and forget it and just focus on what you're doing and how your technique is, it takes the other pieces out of the equation, because you can question yourself, you know, do I have the settings right? Is it me? Is it the welder? That's a huge bonus for a MIG welder. So that's a positive point in the Arccaptain MIG200's column. Now, as someone who's used a number of different cheap welders and expensive welders, I have to say the components for the MIG200 are right on par with any of those other cheap welders I've ever used. I would say the quality of the case is actually significantly better than most of the cheaper welders I've used. The controls are very straightforward, very intuitive. If I was gonna give any negative points to Arccaptain, it would really only be that if this is a welder for a beginner, it doesn't come with wire, it doesn't come with a regulator. Those are two pretty critical things you're gonna need if you're doing shielded gas welding. So I would maybe knock it a little bit there. We haven't talked about price point at all. This welder brand new is $500. Right now it's on sale for 350 bucks. So like 350 bucks on a solid machine is fantastic. This is definitely a unit that you could pick up, start welding with today, and get years of good use out of, I think. It is a 200 amp welder, so we have that 220, 110 compatibility. It automatically detects the voltage and changes that for you. So a lot of the thinking has been taken out of this unit. You can just power it on, put it in the syn mode, and simply go about using it. So, you know, overall, I think it's impressive for a budget welder. We are in like the golden age of cheap welders right now, because they're not just cheap, they're of pretty darn good quality. So big plus of the Arccaptain MIG200, I would say if you are at all considering an entry-level MIG welder, I would definitely consider the MIG200. So that's gonna do it for today's episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope the information we provide you might help you pick out a unit. Of all of the cheaper type welders that I've used, you know, I've been impressed by all of them in different ways, but I would say the Arccaptain has actually exceeded my expectations from what I have experienced with other welders. You know, a lot of those welders will get the job done and they are cheap and they might have multi-functions. This one does have multi-functions, but it feels like it's set up more to be a MIG welder than anything else. Sometimes when you get into those multi-process units, you are sacrificing something on all of those processes in order to have all of them. This unit in particular feels like it does everything you would want it to do as a MIG welder. So if you're looking for a straightforward MIG welder, you don't care about all the other processes like the plasma cutter and stuff, this unit does not have that option. You could get TIG welding on it, but again, you're sacrificing a lot in that TIG function. As a MIG welder, it's a great welder. I think it's great for beginners, and I think, you know, if you're someone who is completely new to welding, you can plug this thing in and use it day one and have some success. So all that said, guys, as usual, if you don't work on your projects, they will not work on themselves. Get out in the garage, get building, and I'll see you on the next episode of Cody Bills.